So I read all of them, and there's nothing as profound and well written and engaging in Seventh-day Adventist literature to compare to the work of Chaim Potok with regard to the Sabbath. And I love them, my family loved them, and many of my Seventh-day Adventist friends love these novels, but they never in the slightest gave me any inkling or desire to become Jewish. Did not give me the slightest desire to become Jewish. It seemed like a completely otherworldly, insular, backward society that was like fascinating in the way that the Amish are fascinating, but I don't think anyone has ever converted to Judaism or was stimulated to pursue an interest in conversion to Judaism because of Chaim Potok's novels.
No. And I always wondered about his audience. Who really is Potok writing for? I've never been able to really decide on that. Is he writing for Jews? Is he writing for non-Jews? Because in many instances it seems like he's writing for Jews, so he's not going to have there's not any kind of agenda to introduce Judaism to the world or to American culture, as it were.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's a curious thing. I mean, his work is so different from other Jewish writers of the time. I mean, people like Bellow and Roth and Malamud were writing assimilationist fiction that wanted to ignore all of these telltale traces of Jewishness, but Potok was just diving into Jewish communities.
Traditional Judaism.
Right.
The most traditional, Haredi Judaism.
Right, yeah.
Now, Potok was raised modern Orthodox. He went to Yeshiva University for his undergraduate work, which is modern Orthodox, but he did have access to and knowledge of the Haredi world. Then he left Yeshiva University and went to Jewish Theological Seminary, where he was ordained as a conservative rabbi. So pretty much all the protagonists in Chaim Potok's novels stay as Orthodox Jews, even though he left Orthodox Judaism in his early 20s.
Yeah.
Number 5, how much room for interpretation is there regarding commands, meaning commandments, in Judaism or Hasidism? Are there laws outside the Torah that the Jewish person observes? What other texts have an authority similar to that of the Torah for the religious Jew? Okay, room for interpretation. It's not that esoteric. Think of America. How much room for interpretation is there with regard to murder? So you can commit murder in America and you can be prosecuted for first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder. But pretty much all Americans agree that murder is a horrible crime and you should be punished for it. So too in Judaism there are a lot of commandments for which there are many degrees of interpretation, but still there are some basics that any observant Jew is going to regard as sacred, such as keeping the Sabbath, keeping kosher. If you don't keep the Sabbath, you don't keep kosher, you're outside of the Jewish tradition and everything that the Jewish text has talked about. So there are some fundamentals in observance, even though you can analyze them and argue about whether or not turning on a light on the Sabbath is breaking the Sabbath. Okay, you can argue about that, but no observant Jew is going to say it's okay to turn on the television on the Sabbath. I'll give you another analogy. You only got jokes about adultery in Western society when adultery became more permitted, more acceptable, more socially acceptable. When people start making jokes about it, that kind of is an indication that something's more permitted. So there are norms that you're expected to maintain if you want to be part of an observant Jewish community, which basically translates into an Orthodox community. You don't want to be part of an Orthodox Jewish community, you can basically do what you like. And you're not going to get thrown out of any synagogue. But if you want to be part of a Jewish community that upholds the Jewish tradition, then there are lots of areas in your life where there is no room for public deviation from these norms if you still want to be accepted into the group.
However, these norms, for example, not flipping a light switch over Shabbat or the Sabbath, that's based on an interpretation of what we find in Torah. which I think is really interesting. I mean, these commandments, as they're understood in the Orthodox community today in 21st century, are still based on interpretation. Again, it doesn't say in the Torah, thou shalt not flip a light switch.
But you're not going to find any Orthodox Jewish synagogue which is cool with you flipping on light switches on Shabbat. They're not.
No,
Anywhere you go
not.
in the world, no Orthodox rabbi at an Orthodox synagogue will tell you it's okay to flip on a light switch on the Sabbath.
Right. Because these are things
So
that
it's become
identify
the
a community.
binding. It's become
Right.
the community has bound an interpretation of this law, and if you want to publicly violate it, you are placing yourself outside of the community.
That's right. I agree with that.
Same too with driving on the Sabbath. The Torah doesn't say you can't drive on the Sabbath, but it says you shall not make a fire on the Sabbath. The rabbis came to define electricity as fire, and turning on a car requires the lighting of spark plugs, which is lighting a fire on Shabbat. So no Orthodox rabbi of the Orthodox synagogue anywhere in the world is going to permit you to drive on the Sabbath. But on the other hand, there are degrees. So let's say you've become newly observant, your family is not observant of Jewish law, you want to be able to go with them to their conservative synagogue. There will be Orthodox rabbis who will tell you privately, you can go if you get a taxi to take you and it's driven by a non-Jew.
But you can't pay the taxi driver.
Right.
You have to
Well,
exchange money on Shabbat.
you can make an arrangement
Somebody
to
else.
pay them later,
Pay them later.
or someone else, or
Okay.
you could have money in an envelope and you can just point it out to them.
Right.
So there
So
are
loopholes.
loopholes or adjustments, or like God's law is immutable, so to speak, but you've got to apply it, constantly changing in different circumstances. So ethics and divine law are both situational and absolute. The situation determines the absolute. So we have completely new situations today that were not foreseen by the rabbis of the Talmud 2,000 years ago. But we search the Talmud and we study the Talmud to try to uncover their approach to Jewish law and how to then apply it to the changing circumstances of today. So what other texts, are there laws outside the Torah that the Jewish person observes? Yeah, there's a Jewish tradition going from the Torah to the entire Hebrew Bible to the Talmud to the ongoing rabbinic tradition. So rabbis are still coming up with laws to this day, because existing laws are not adequate to the changing circumstances. But also the observant body of Jews has a vote. So if the observant Jews decide not to follow a law that a rabbi has decreed, then that law falls by the wayside. And so the major texts outside of the Torah, the similar to the Torah, well, the Talmud effectively has much more influence on the way observant Jews live their lives than does the Torah. So the Talmud is the ongoing oral interpretation of the Torah. The Talmud was basically closed by around year 600 of the Common Era, and then after that you have rabbinic commentaries trying to apply Talmudic law to the changing circumstances of the day. One student was curious about the number of Jewish holidays mentioned in the novel. Could you comment on the role and function of these holidays, or perhaps the rituals surrounding them? Maybe briefly
That's a big question.
discuss a few of the holidays most cherished within the community. I'll give that one to you, Monica.
Oh, most cherished.
Well, are there any Jewish holidays that people should know about out there?
Purim's a favorite of mine.
That's a good one.
It's about reckless abandon and
Drinking.
celebratory drunkenness. Well, I mean, we're kind of in the midst of a Jewish holiday right now. I mean, we've just
We're in the middle of
celebrating
Sukkot.
Sukkot.
Yeah, shake my lulav. I know you say that to all the girls like this. I didn't feel special.
Oh, I didn't know I
feel
get a chance to
treasured.
shake
I didn't feel
Lou's
treasured
lulav,
by
too.
the opportunity to shake your lulav. I'm sure there been a whole train of pious Jewish women